In the midst of the COVID-19 outbreak and the financial markets mayhem that has ensued during it, I couldn't bother but think, why? Why the panic? Are we really as interconnected as we seem? And at the end of the day, do we really have to be? In the beginning of our history, every human was an opportunistic hunter-gatherer on a mission to find nourishment. We all migrated from place to place in these very small groups, and the weather always had a say. The next step was discovering agriculture, this bargaining mechanism that one had with both nature and time. Agriculture was the biggest paradigm shift in human history. It tied us to land and gave us more free time. And of course, knowing what we know about human beings and how they use their free time, needless to say, the population started growing rapidly. All of a sudden, forethought was a prerequisite to success. It was the forefront of this very human evolution. Cycles of production, weather conditions, and other exogenous variables became inextricably tied to the seemingly continuous pattern of bargaining with the future through sacrificing the present. Another forward leap came as a byproduct of the agricultural revolution. Agriculture created densely populated patches of land, and human minds began to connect. They began to create these intersubjective realities and understandings such as laws, social contracts, and eventually, money in markets. Most people have talents that have exchangeability potential. You know, the age-old, I'll scratch yours so you can scratch mine type of thing. So people with crafts and talents got together in these newly formed civilizations. At first, prices were determined relatively. One crab could be worth 5 oranges to me, but simultaneously it could be worth 3 oranges to you. Now, with free-floating fiat currency, we'd like to think that we've got it all figured out. At the most basic level of human trade, there is craftsmanship. It's just two people shaking hands and consenting on an exchange. I make something for you, you pay me. Now, at the extreme level, you have the element of outlook looming over every move you make. If you're a farmer, you have the outlook of crop prices looming over you. So nowadays, you have a futures market valued at about $20 trillion. If you're a lender, you've got the outlook of debtor solvency looming over you. And we all know how big that market is. And if you're an investor, it's the outlook of the business, right? So from an analytical perspective, it's the sum of the free cash flows of the business, along with what you can sell it for at the end of the forecasting period, discounted to the present value. And in the case of a company, that discount rate incorporates opportunity costs and other risks that may affect value. A good hypothetical example of markets function is how we behave in auctions. So let's assume that you, me, and a bunch of other people are stacked up in an auditorium. You're all facing me, and in front of me is a gift wrap compartment the size of a shoebox. Now no one except me knows what's inside the box, so I lay down the rules and I say, do I have $1? Seconds later, $1 becomes 2. And the other side of the room might say $4. Another bidder might come in at 6, 6 to 9, 9 to 12, and then let's say the room then settles at $19. Basically, we got the box sold at the price of $19. Now mind you, none of the participants in this hypothetical scenario could have known what's inside the box, but they might have had some hypotheses. For example, they might have thought that if I ended up selling a box full of nothing, the buyer would be very vocal with his disappointment, thereby putting me in an uncomfortable scenario, one that I would probably want to avoid. And perhaps they might have known that I knew that. And they might have also known that me knowing that would guide me into making the box worth the winning bidder's while, as opposed to putting myself in a socially awkward situation. The point is, whatever information the audience might have had or thought they had was embedded in the price of that box. That auction helped pinpoint value in a quick and efficient way. And that definitely means something. To drive this idea home, let me take you back to 1986 at the Kennedy Space Center, the most anticipated space shuttle launched since Apollo 11. Teacher Krista McAuliffe was set to be the world's first ever civilian space traveler.
Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs. Velocity 2,257 feet per second. Altitude 4.3 nautical miles. Downrange distance 3 nautical miles.
So the 25th Space Shuttle mission is now on the way after more delays than NASA cares to count. This morning it looked as though they were not going to be able to get off.
1 minute 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance.
And just like that, boom. Everyone aboard the shuttle died. The public was confused. How could NASA have got it wrong? Well, in order to answer that question, President Reagan appointed a blue ribbon panel composed of scientists and space experts, the most notable of them being Lance Armstrong. The panel was even headed by the U.S.'s former Secretary of State William Rogers. So it's safe to say that these guys were no chumps. However, the baffling point is that financial markets took 1 minute to figure out what took the panel months to uncover. NASA hired 4 corporate contractors to help them with the space mission. Some of these names might be familiar to you, like Rockwell International, which manufactured the shuttle and its main engines, Lockheed, which took care of ground support, Martin Marietta, which manufactured the shuttle's external fuel tanks, and finally Morton Thiokol, which manufactured the shuttle's solid fuel booster rockets. Before, during, and after the fatal crash, each of these companies' shares were trading on the stock exchange. On the morning of the launch, it was business as usual. But within an hour of the crash, each company's stock experienced a slight decline. However, there was one company which really stood out. One company really took a beating, so much so that the exchange had to stop its shares from being traded. By the end of the trading day, Lockheed, Martin Marietta, and Rockwell stock prices recovered. It was as if the disaster hadn't taken place. Morton Thiokol, on the other hand, had declined 13% in market value, the equivalent of $200 million at the time. But the important mind-boggling point here is that Morton Thiokol's technology was in fact what caused the crash, and the cost of its legal settlements and its foregone and lost profits that are directly attributable to the crash actually summed to a value of approximately $200 million, matching the value decline on the day of the disaster. And in case you're wondering, research has shown no evidence of insider trading, meaning it's highly unlikely that anybody leaked any information. In several months, the Blue Ribbon panel confirmed the information that the market had crystallized in a single day. Morton Thiokol was indeed to blame. Anyways, the point of these examples is to illustrate the almost crystal ball-like properties of the markets. Nowadays, we flock to markets for inflation expectations, food shortages, political turmoil, and other very important elements of modern-day life. The fact is, paying attention to markets is very important because the value of almost everything is always under negotiation, and everything is connected to everything. Mind you though, it's also good to question the status quo. The agricultural revolution lowered our average height, lifespan, and made us vulnerable to disease. The industrial revolution made us force kids to work in mines. And the technological revolution has glued our eyes to our screens and made our relationships cold and distant. So, With all this, let me leave you with this thought. Do not blindly accept the status quo. And I would say, do not worry too much either. Let the markets do the worrying for you.